is Dave from examPAL, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the winning strategy to get 700 plus on the GMAT. So before we kick things into gear here, I just want to make sure that I'm not sitting here talking to myself. If any of you guys could take to the chat, which is on the right side of your screen, you could just tell me if you can hear me all right. That would be great. And then I'll start talking. This is me. I'm a tutor here at examPAL. And I see Anjali. Thank you very much. Great. Just wanted to make sure. So, hi guys. Thank you, Zubin. So we have about an hour together, and we're going to be talking about how, once again, to get a winning strategy. What is a winning strategy on the GMAT? And now that you've discovered the chat function, feel free to use it throughout and ask me any questions. So let's get into it. Although before we do, I want to talk just for a few minutes about who we are at examPAL and why we're even qualified to talk about this topic. So at examPAL, we're a test prep company founded by tutors with a lot of experience in the industry. And based on insight of tutors from the industry that in a lot of courses, students are paying a lot, not for the right product. And what's worse, they only figure out that they're not paying for the right product when it's too late, when their preparation is over. And why is that? So a few things that we've noticed with regular courses is that they're frustrating. Why? Because they teach in a one-size-fits-all kind of way. This is the question. This is how you solve it. This is the correct way. And that doesn't really accurately represent what these tests are actually checking, what the GMAT is actually checking. For many questions, there's more than one right way to solve. And what's more, there's more than one right way to solve for what that's the best for different people. Meaning for one person, one way might be the most effective, and for another person, a different way might actually be faster and have a higher chances of success. And if this sounds a little bit general right now, one way and another way, that's fine. Don't worry about it, because that's a lot about what we're going to talk about today. What are these different ways? But just at this point, so let's just say in general, a one-size-fits-all course kind of misses this. Another thing that one-size-fits-all courses miss is that oftentimes there's a very large emphasis on what is the correct solution and on how to solve it. And the one way that's usually taught is what we're going to call soon a precise way of solving, which involves a lot of calculations and getting to the answer on your own, which is all good and well, but it's oftentimes not the most efficient way to solve. Whereas in these tests, the biggest enemy we have is time. And once again, even if the way that's being taught is rather quick, there's really no such thing as the fastest way, because different ways are going to be faster for different people. And here again, it's important to learn not the right way to solve for everyone, but what is the best, fastest way for you. And lastly, the courses rather themselves can be very, or actually not can be, but must be actually quite time consuming and inefficient, because if you're teaching for everyone, then you're not teaching to a certain level. And this also is true for studying with test books, for example. You just get hit with thousands of questions ranging from very easy to very hard. And that means, by definition, that you're going to be spending a lot of time solving questions that are either too easy for you and kind of boring, or too hard for you and maybe you're just going to be frustrated. And none of those are especially helpful. We need to be studying questions that are at our level, maybe a little bit below our level just to make sure that we know the fundamentals, or a little bit above our level just to challenge ourselves a little bit, but not too much in either direction. So again, there's a lot of when studying everyone the same way, then there's a big disadvantage for the individual test seeker. So we identified all these sort of weaknesses and flaws, and the main thing that we realized that wasn't being addressed is what we consider the main skill on the GMAT. And our main insight is that this skill isn't knowledge, okay? We're going to talk about is most of the knowledge that we use on the GMAT is stuff we've already learned in high school. The main skill is what we call cognitive flexibility. What is cognitive flexibility? Well, cognitive flexibility is your ability to change the set of tools that you're using very quickly in response to changes in the data that you're getting. Okay, so it means using one set of tools, say a precise set of tools in one question, and then shifting radically and using some quick shortcut in the next question because you've identified this is the most fitting tool for this question. And this is really what the test is checking. This is why there's, again, harsh time constraints. This is why the test moves rapidly and I would say dramatically between different topics. One question is going to be algebra, then we jump to geometry, then we have word problems, all one right after the other. We can't get too comfortable with one way of working or one way of thinking. And example, what we work on is really not only providing you with the knowledge you need for the test, although of course we do that also, but with training you for the fastest way to solve each question. So we do basically three things that no one else does. One is we study the way you think, okay? On our course, we track your solutions, and not only your solutions, but the tools you use in order to solve them. And we try and build a profile of who you are as a student and what your weaknesses and what your strengths are. And at the same time, we're studying the effectiveness of all possible methods. Remember when I said before that each question has several different ways to solve it? So we're measuring for all of our thousands and thousands of students how everyone is solving it, which is the way with the highest chances of success, which is the way that's fastest. And then we combine these two things, our knowledge about you and our knowledge about the question in general, to give you the fastest way to solve the question. So just in a little more detail, what does our course consist of? So we have interactive lessons where we teach the material for each topic, or rather I should say each subtopic, each specific subject on the test. So not quant, but rather integers or triangles. Each of these we have a lesson where we teach you the fundamentals, and then we have another lesson where we go into answer strategies, and they're interactive. And then after these two videos, we move on to the practice phase, in which we ask you questions and we show you a few different ways to solve the questions. So, for example, the question you see on your screen now can be solved in more than one way. So the first way is the logical approach, in which we can figure out the ratio between the numerator and the denominator, and from that get to the answer being between 2 and 3. But we could go a totally different way. We could use the precise approach and just go ahead and simplify the algebraic expression until we get an answer. Okay. And another thing we can do a totally different way is the alternative approach, just by plugging in numbers and making them as easy as possible, simple numbers. And then we're going to get to an answer as well, which is, while it's not necessarily the exact answer, 2.5 isn't the exact answer, it's definitely representative of the range of the exact answer, and thus, in this case, the answer has to be between 2 and 3. And if this was a little bit quick, don't worry about it. This is a lot of what we're going to talk about in the next half hour. But the point that I want to press upon you now is just that we do this calculation for each and every question. What are the different ways? We ask you what you're familiar with, what you're comfortable with. In the improvement phase, we ask you, if you get it right, what was the tool you used? If you got it wrong, we ask you, what was the main reason for your mistake? And then based on this, we get to the final stage of our practice, which we call the optimization, in which we present you with the different solution tools and give you the match for you. So this, and you see on your screen now, it's an example for a question where there were 4 different possible solutions. That won't always be the case. Sometimes there's 2, sometimes there's 3. And we say, this is what you should do. You should use the precise approach based on triangulating both your personal data and everyone else's data. So that's basically us. In terms of kind of test prep terms, we are using deep technology. Basically what we're doing is we're moving from what you'd call machine learning to machine teaching. We're using machines to teach you. And we won all kinds of awards, not so important right now. We have very good feedbacks from our students. But what's more to the point is that we're the only test prep that I know of, at least, that puts our money where our mouth is, and we have a success guarantee. So if you have a previous GMAT score, official GMAT score, that is not an online exam, then we guarantee a 70-point success guarantee up to 700. Go to our website and check out our success guarantee. Take us up on it. So that's who we are, and thank you for bearing with me. And now, without further ado, let's start talking about the 700 Club, what it takes to be in it. And don't worry about it, because the things I've already been talking about actually are going to give us a head start in our discussion, because the first tool that we're going to be talking about is cognitive flexibility, which I already introduced to you. So we're going to be talking about two tools in the time we have left in our next 15 minutes. Two things that we think set apart people who are good and score 600, 650, and people who are very good or even great and score above 700. And the things that separate them, as I indicated before, aren't knowledge, right? At these levels, everybody knows the basic material. It isn't necessarily intelligence or anything abstract like that, but rather we think it's cognitive flexibility and rapid improvement. So cognitive flexibility, as I've already defined it, is the ability to find the fastest way to solve each question and apply it. So what do I mean a little bit more specifically? So I already kind of indicated, sort of hand waved at three different ways to solve each question, but let's define them a little bit more precisely. All right, so the first way is what we call the precise way, and it's probably the way that you're most geared to do already. It's probably that if I gave you a question now, you would just go ahead and do. And that's the reason is this is the way that we're taught to solve things in school and high school. Just use regular tools and arrive at the answer yourself, and only when you get to the answer on your page on your own, look up at the screen and seek out the answer choice, which is the same. Hopefully there is one, right? Hopefully you've done it right. And I would say that pretty much every question on the GMAT, certainly in the quant, can be solved with this tool. And sometimes it's the best tool, but oftentimes it's not the most efficient tool to solve question. And if we're just going to use this, then there's a good chance we're going to run out of time unless we're exceptionally good at doing calculations and stuff. Okay, so the second tool that we can use is called the alternative approach. And this means using all kinds of tools that are going to get us to the right answer, even though we might look back when we get to the right answer and not even be entirely sure how we got there. And this can be tools such as plugging in a number where there's a variable, using the answers, using the figure if there is one, estimating, all kinds of stuff like that. And I'm being a little bit general now, of course, but obviously in the course we talk about much more specifically what exactly these tools are. And finally, there's some questions we can solve using the logical approach, in which we implement some kind of logical rule that doesn't appear in the question, something from outside, such as the logic of prices, the logic of averages, just kind of basic things we need to know and be able to use and implement them and cut through the question and get to the answer sometimes very quickly. Because sometimes using logic, you can just look at it and say, well, 4 of these are, I don't even need to calculate a thing. They're absolutely impossible because we know the question has to be a negative fraction, just using logic. Okay? So these are the 3 tools. Now the question, of course, is when do we apply which one? If one of you could just tell me now, also give me a reality check that you're all hearing me all right. Just I want to be sure. Maybe if once every 10 minutes one of you could just say, "Hi, Dave, we hear you," that would be great. Anyway, I'm going to keep talking. So when do we use all of these 3? So the bad news is that I'm not. Thanks, Ayushi. Great. So great, Zubin. So in 10 minutes, you guys can race between you to see who does it. Anyway, it's fine. Unfortunately, the answer is not You use the precise for data sufficiency and use the alternative when it's circles questions that ask you about ratios. If it were something as simple as that, then maybe this webinar would be shorter and I could just give you the tools and you'd go home. But there's no one precise answer for when to use each one. Rather, it's a case-by-case question we have to ask ourselves for each problem. And it really depends on two things. One is the characteristics of the question in front of us. We have to look at a question and size it up and say to ourselves, what is it asking us to do? Do we have an estimate of how long it will take us to solve this precisely? Obviously, we want to estimate this without actually doing it, but can we have an idea? Does it look like some kind of alternative tool here might be A, possible, and B, time-saving? Are there any clues here that logic will apply? All these things are things we need to ask ourselves. And at the same time, we should ask ourselves, what is our personal strength and weaknesses, right? I might say to myself, I know that I'm really good at solving the precise way. Logic takes me a little bit longer, with this type of question, but because this is a question that has to do with fractions and percents, actually, it's easier for me to plug in numbers, so I'm going to go with that. And the thing is with this second thing is that even more than the first question, this is a question that we really can only answer if we gain experience using these different tools. Because if all of you were just to ask yourself this thing right now, I'm not sure, but I'm predicting that for many of you, your intuition will be that you do things best the precise way because maybe you're more used to using it, or maybe something else. But the point is that you don't yet have experience with all three. So really, ideally, once you work with these tools for a little while, then you'll have a more grounded answer to the question, and you say to yourself, oh, I know that for this type of question, it's best for me to try and use logic, for example. And for that, again, you have to know what the different PAL tools are and use them a little bit. The good news is that at examPAL, the answer to this question in the end isn't intuition, but rather we're giving you feedback to let you know which tools you're using, which ones you can use more, which ones you're good at, and so on. All right, so all of this was kind of a long way of introducing this big headline that we call the PALgorithm, our way to solve. And now I want to start giving you guys examples, so you don't feel I'm talking kind of in an abstract way. So what I'm going to do now is put a question up on the screen, and what I want you guys to do is not what your intuition may be to do, which is to start solving it, but rather I want you to solve a more high-level question, which is how should I solve it? What is the tool, precise, alternative, or logical, that I think will be the best to solve this? So take a second and look at the question and answer this question. How should I solve it? Of the 900 guests that attended a wedding, 36% were women. If 450 men left the wedding, the women would be what percentage of the remaining guests? So I'm going to let you guys look at the question for about 10 more seconds. Not much more than that. Okay, that's all the time you have left. And now I want you guys to answer this survey. What do you think is the fastest way to solve this question? Is it precise? Is it alternative? Is it logical? Or if you can't tell. And if you're saying to yourself, well, wait a minute, Dave, we didn't have enough time, that's kind of the point. Because these decisions of how to solve a question are ones we have to do very quickly. We have to look at the questions and size them up. So I'm going to give you guys another, 20 seconds to answer this. We'll be back with you guys in a second. Okay, so not all of you have voted, but whoever did. I'm going to wrap it up in just a few seconds. So let's see. Actually, interesting results. Not what I was expecting necessarily. So as you guys can see, most of you thought that logical is the way to go, which is interesting. A minority thought precise. One very honest person said he couldn't tell. And no one thought alternative, which is interesting. So let's go back to the question and let's talk about it, all right? So first of all, let's talk about how to solve it the precise way. Because as I said in the beginning, the precise way is pretty much always possible. So the precise way, we just go ahead and start simplifying and solving, turning the information we have, the words that we have, into equations and into data. So we know 36% of 900 people were women. So what is 36% of 900? Well, we can turn it into this fraction, which we can then simplify. 36 times 9 is, again, we don't have a calculator, so if we're very good at math, maybe we'll be able to do 36 times 9 in our head, but come in to break it up, do 36 times 10, 360 minus 36, 36, which is 324. That's the amount of women we have in the wedding. And then 450 men left, right? Leaving 450 total guests, meaning the amount of women are 324 out of 450, and this fraction represents the answer. However, the answer, now we can look over at the answers and see that they're all in percentages, not in fractions with 450 as the denominator. So we have to go ahead and simplify this till we get the fraction that we can transfer into a percentage. So one way to do that would be to take out a common denominator, which is 3 in this case, leaving us with 108 over 150, which we could then again divide by 3, giving us 36 over 50. And then in order to get it to a percentage, we want the denominator to be 100. So we multiply that by 2, and we get 72 over 100, 72%. Answer choice D. So this was pretty straightforward, and it worked. So definitely those of you that wrote precise weren't wrong by any stretch. This is a tool which is fine. However, look how much text there is on the screen. And I did this kind of quickly. I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, it would have taken more time to write this down. I was running this a little bit. By the way, if you feel that way about my explanation, that's fine, because you will get a recording of this afterwards. So don't worry about me running through it. So the point is that this could take a while, and this is why those of you who thought that logical was correct had a point, because using logic here could be very effective. Let's see how that would look like. So in logical, we're not looking to do calculations at all. We're just looking to kind of understand the fundamentals of the question. So what is it telling us here? So we're being asked about a percentage, which is, of course, what is a part out of a whole. And the question is, what are the women out of all the guests? Now, we know that in the beginning there were a certain percentage, and then the women remain the same, right? Same number of women, but the guests, their number halved. We're being asked about half the guests. So if the numerator remains the same, but the denominator becomes half of what it was, that's like multiplying the whole thing by 2. Meaning if the percentage before was 36%, now it's going to be 72%. Because the number of women remained the same, but the total we're being asked about, the whole we're being asked about, is only half of what it once was. And if you look now at what's up on the screen, we didn't have to use any numbers. And theoretically, if we could figure this thing out, this could be very, very quick. This could be a question that you could answer within 15 or 20 seconds even, which is very fast. To remind you, we have about 2 minutes on average to solve each question. So just think of the advantage it gives us if we can solve even part of the questions logically, saving us time for other questions where maybe we can't. Okay, if there are any questions about this, was this clear? Anybody wants to ask anything, go ahead. We're doing okay with time, and I think I should be able to answer you. But if not, we're going to move ahead and look at another example, another question. And again, I want you guys to use your PAL minds and ask yourselves, what is the best way to solve this? Okay, so 2 printers run simultaneously. an inkjet printer that prints at a uniform rate of 80 pages every 15 minutes, and a laser printer that prints 100 pages every 10 minutes. How many minutes will it take for them to print 230 pages? Okay, so again, don't go ahead and solve, which might be your intuition, but rather think for a second, what is the way that you would solve this? I'm not going to do a poll this time, although you are welcome to write in the chat what you think. But let's talk about it, okay? So what do we have here in this question? We're being asked about two printers, and we have the same information about both of them, right? Their rate of printing, except we don't have the rate. Well, it's not given in the same units. We want one of them is for every 15 minutes, and the other is for the same for every 10 minutes. So we can't directly compare between them, or rather, we can't with the data as we have it now. We have to change it a little bit. And thus, in order to answer the question of how much it will take them to print 230 pages, we need to do a little bit of work. So one way we could do it is using, in this case, the alternative approach. How would we do that? Well, let's say that the answer is 10 minutes. What I'm doing here is I'm using the alternative tool, I should say, of using the answers, which is a tool we can often use. What does this mean? So, an open-ended question, how many minutes will it take them to print 230 pages? Theoretically, it has an infinite number of possible solutions. Maybe it takes them 5 minutes. Maybe it takes them 78 minutes. Go no. And if you do it in a precise way or a logical way, you might get to an infinite number of solutions, which could be correct or not. However, that's really not the case, because when we look at the answer choices, A, B, C, D, and E, we only have 5 possible solutions. We know it's going to be one of these. It's going to be either 10, 15, 18, 20, or 30. And for that reason, and also just for a reason that oftentimes it's easier to start with the answer and work our way back, we can do that. We can take the answers, plug them in, see if they work, and if not, eliminate them and move on. So let's do that here. Let's say that the answer is A. Let's say it takes 10 minutes. So what's going to happen? Well, if printer 1 prints 80 every 15 minutes, so 10 minutes is 2/3 of 15. So it's going to print 2/3 of 80. Right? So that's not exactly 60, because 2/3 of 80 doesn't divide neatly into a third, right? But it's about 60. It's close to 60, because another thing we can do when we're going alternative is estimate. And that's good enough for us now. It's about 60. In printer 2, we know exactly how many it is. We don't have to calculate anything, because we're told it prints 100 every 10 minutes. So we have 100 plus close to 60, nowhere near 230, right? In 10 minutes, they're not going to print anywhere near 230. We can go ahead and eliminate 10. No need to get to an exact number, because it's not close. So we know we need to jump from 160 to 230. So that's an improvement, which is on the one hand substantial, but on the other hand, we're definitely not multiplying it by, we're not doubling it or even more. So we definitely don't need to go look at D or E. Those are going to be too much pretty clearly, even without actually checking them. We know the answer is going to be B or C. And off the top of my head, I would say B looks a little bit more suspicious, because it's closer to times 1.5 than it is times 1.8. So let's check. Let's see what happens if it took 15 minutes. So here we already know the answer for 1, which, by the way, is another reason to check B, the same way it was useful to look at B, because we already had the answer for one of the printers. We don't have to go ahead and calculate it. So for the first printer, we know it printed exactly 80 pages. And for the second printer, it's a very easy calculation. 15 minutes is 10 times 1.5. So 100 times 1.5 is 150. So in 15 minutes, they printed, excuse me. In 15 minutes, they printed 80 plus 150, exactly 230 pages. That's our answer. And even though we had to check 2 different answers, I would argue this still was easier than finding the precise solution here, which would require finding a common denominator of both of these rates. I guess you would multiply the first by 2 and the second by 3 to see how much they would do in 30 minutes. And then however much that is, you'd have to divide that by 230 to see how much time, which would be a little bit of work. I think it would be more work than this. So that's how an alternative solution looks, or that's how one alternative solution looks. It's an example, of course. And I hope it was clear. Again, feel free to ask any questions. But what I want to do now is move into verbal, and look at a verbal question, because so far we only talked about quant, but it is not the case that the PAL works only for quant. It might be a little bit more straightforward there, but actually the same is true for verbal. For each question of verbal, we also need to ask ourselves, how should I solve it? Should I go precise? Should I go alternative? Or should I go logical? So let's look at a question here. The interview is an essential part of a successful hiring program because with it, job applicants who have personalities that are unsuited to the requirements of the job will be eliminated from consideration. This argument logically depends on which of the following assumptions. And now, without reading the answers, and without giving you guys time to read the answers, I want you to answer the question, what is the most effective way to solve it? And hold on a second. You should be seeing on your screen, once again, a poll about what is the fastest way to solve this verbal question, and I want you guys to tell me what you think. I'm going to give you guys about 30 seconds, say, to give me your opinions. So get your votes in. I'll be with you in a second. Okay, very interesting to see these results. Not necessarily what I was expecting, but then again, we haven't yet talked about what these tools really mean in the verbal. So this is what you guys thought. Pretty mixed result, but definitely a clear majority for logical, like the last question, which is interesting. Just FYI, most groups, oftentimes precise is kind of the go-to, but not with you guys, which is interesting. So let's talk about it. What is the best way to solve this? All right. So I want to start by talking about what a precise solution would look like here. So, or you know what? Actually, no. Before I talk about a precise solution, I want to talk about what an alternative solution would look like, which most of you didn't think was the right answer. But and you were right about that. But I want to talk about why. And the reason I want to talk about all this is because many times, many students in the verbal section run into the trap, I would call it, or at least the mistake, of going over all the answers and using them to see which answer, I would say, looks the best and picking that one. Now, why is this a problem? Why is this a trap? The reason is, well, there are two reasons. One is that it just takes too long. If you look here, reading the answers is going to take us at least 3 times the amount of time as reading the question. If we want to understand each answer, we have to give each of them time. And quite simply, if in the verbal section we read all the answers every time and just kind of think about each answer on its own, we're going to run out of time. We're not going to have enough time to solve everything. And another reason is that the answers can be very misleading. They're designed to be misleading. And this is what I want to show you guys here. So if we just look at the answers here individually, pretty much all of them we're going to see are convincing, or at least not clearly wrong. Okay, because they all are giving us, in this case, pretty good advice on how to be a good manager, or what a good interview is. Let's look at D. The only purpose of an interview is to evaluate whether job applicants' personalities are suited to the requirements of the job. Okay, that's pretty much the definition of what an interview is, right? Something that evaluates whether people are suited to the job. It definitely doesn't seem wrong to me. It's not something that I read it and I immediately want to eliminate it. Let's look at another one, say E. The fit of job applicants' personalities to the requirements of the job was once the most important factor in making hiring decisions. Okay, this is an historical claim about something that used to be true. I don't know, it might be true, it might not be true, but it's definitely not something that, again, I can read and necessarily state it isn't true and go ahead and eliminate it. It's something that makes sense. Now, the problem with D and E here is that they make sense, but they're not really answering the question. They're not good answers to the question we're asked, which is, what does the argument logically depend on? But if you just start reading the answers, you can sort of lose sight of that and forget what we were being asked. And this is the reason why the alternative approach, which includes the tool of using the answers, as we just showed with our last quant question, is not the most efficient tool in verbal, especially with critical reasoning. And on the contrary, it should be used kind of as a last resort. Sometimes we need to use it. Sometimes it's the best, but if we can use something else, we will. And in this question, I want to show you guys how actually a precise solution could be pretty effective. So let's apply the precise approach, which we will do when there's enough information in the question stem itself. All right, so what is this question actually telling us? The first thing it's saying is that interviews are good or good enough. Why? What makes them useful interviews? The fact that they eliminate people who don't fit, whose personalities aren't suited, right? Interviews are essential because they eliminate unsuitable applicants. If I had to summarize the sentence above, that's how I would summarize it. Okay, so this tells us two things. One of them about the hiring process, and the other about the interview tool specifically. The first of them is that we care a lot about personality, right? Obviously, if we're saying this is good because it eliminates people whose personality isn't suitable, what we're saying is we care about people's personality, if it's suitable or not. And the other more specific thing is that interviews can measure personality. Interviews are successful tools at measuring personality. And this is something we can get to just from reading the text. And the argument logically depends on these two things. So now that I've figured that out, now I can go ahead and read the answers and look for an answer that tells us either one or both of these things, which are assumptions that the argument logically depends on. So now we can kind of read them quickly, but without stopping to ask ourselves, is this correct? Is it not correct? But really just, does it fit one of these things? So A hiring program will be successful if it includes interviews. That's just restating the argument that's above. That doesn't help us. It's not an assumption. B, the interview is a more important part of a successful hiring program than is the development of a job description. Maybe, but that's not essential. There's nothing in the argument about comparing it to a job description. We're just being at the interview itself. C, interviewers can accurately identify applicants whose personalities are unsuited to the requirements of the job. So that's almost word for word the second assumption I already said, right? I said the second assumption that this depends on is that interviews can do this thing. They can identify if people's personalities are suitable or not, and that's exactly what C is telling us. And for that reason, we can go ahead and pick C. And I hope I've showed you why using the precise approach here, even though maybe I talked about it for a long time, is actually pretty effective. It helps us from getting kind of confused by the different answer choices, but figuring out on our own pretty much what the answer is going to be, or narrowing it down to 2 or 3 possible answers. And then we can go ahead and look at the questions and find one that fits, which will be rather quick. So that's an example of a precise one here. I hope that was clear. Let me know, guys, if you have any questions about the PALgorithm in general, because now we're actually going to move ahead and talk about the second tool that we said we're going to talk about today, right? So we're talking about 2 tools that help, that are essential for their scoring 700. The first of which is using cognitive flexibility, which is using the PALgorithm, and the second of which we call rapid improvement. Okay, and that's what I'm going to start talking about now. So what do I mean when I say rapid improvement, and why is it important? Well, the graph that you're seeing in front of you represents a common phenomenon that we see in GMAT studies, which a lot of students. And this is what we call plateauing. What happens is that students at the beginning of their studies are getting better, and they're doing it very quickly. That's this left part of the graph. But then at a certain point, improvement starts getting slower. That's the next part over on the graph. Until at a certain point kind of levels off and almost stops happening. More studying, all it brings is the same results time and time again. And I mean, maybe this is a little bit extreme. Maybe it's a slight improvement, slight incline, but for many people, it's not much more than that. And this makes sense. The reason it happens is because in the beginning, improvement is natural, okay? We're learning new things. We're getting better at them. But at a certain point, it stops being natural, okay? We get to a certain point where we've learned all the material and we've gotten our question-solving ability to what is basically a natural limit of how fast we can read, how fast we can calculate. And at this point, improvement becomes a lot harder. And what I want to tell you is that improving once you've already gotten to this point, that's what separates good GMAT students from great GMAT students, from 650 GMAT students from 700 and over GMAT students. Because if you put in the work, you're going to be able to get to this level of the plateau. But if you want to pass it, you have to do a few extra things. And what are these things? So let's talk about it. How do 700 plus scorers improve once they've already learned all the material and gotten their basic kind of methods under control? So the first thing is researching and implementing what you've learned from researching. So no one likes getting questions wrong, yours truly included. But if you want to be good at improving, you have to see all your mistakes as opportunities to learn. So what I want you to do is after every mistake, ask yourself, why, and every mistake in practice, that is, while you're practicing, ask yourself, why did I get this wrong? Was the problem a professional problem? In other words, did I just not know the material? Was this a question about triangles and I didn't remember what a 30, 60, 90 triangle, what its ratios are? And if that's the case, this is actually the simplest thing to solve. Okay, it's very clear what we need to do. We need to go back and go over this material and solve it and study it. And then once we've done that, we can go back to the questions. But oftentimes that's not the problem. Some questions, the problem is technical. Did I just do something that messed up the question even though I know the material? And the way you can often identify these is questions that you look at after you've gotten it wrong and you look at the solution and you say to yourself, oh, that was a stupid mistake, but it doesn't really count. I know this material. And if that's the case, what I want to urge you to do is not to kind of move on and say, that's fine, I know this material, but on the contrary, pause and say, okay, I know this material, what could I do to avoid this mistake? Especially if it's a kind of mistake that repeats itself. And it can sometimes be very, very simple habits or techniques. Something as simple as just writing down the answer choices on your pad and crossing them out one by one, and not just solving and going ahead and picking an answer, which can get you confused. So these oftentimes are actually, if we take the time to pause them, actually we can have the best long-term effects of just one simple change. And finally, maybe the problem was strategic. Maybe I wasn't solving in the right way. Maybe I wasn't using the right PAL tool. And by the way, this could also be true for a question that I did get right, but maybe took me too long. Maybe it took me 2.5 or 3 minutes when I want to be under 2 minutes. And if this is the case, so let's look at the question again. See if other answer tools are possible, and if they are, how applicable they are, how much time it'll take me to solve them. And if we see that one of them is better, then again, what's important is not to just learn for the specific question, but ask ourselves, what about this question made the logical tool, for example, the best way to solve it, and how am I going to identify this the next time around? How am I going to identify this type of question the next time around? So this is the type of thinking I want you to be doing as you're going through. And once you've done that, go ahead and implement it. Go ahead and seek out similar questions that replicate the problem you've just had. So if it's fundamental, just questions that are about that material, questions that are, say about a 30, 60, 90 triangle. If it's a technical thing, just questions that give you, again, the conditions for mixing it up. If all that happened to you is that, you made a mistake and you forgot to check the option of a negative number, you were only checking positive integers. So seek out more questions in which it's not specified whether the answer is positive or negative, and make sure that you actually check both options, for example. And if it's a question in which the problem was had to do with a PAL and it was actually a logical tool, then go ahead and seek questions in which we at examPAL tell you the logical tool is the recommended way to go, and see if you use that way to go. Okay? And again, this is something that we help you do on examPAL, because we were asking you about each question, why did you do it, and we're giving you feedback. We're feeding you, as it were, questions that work on these weaknesses that we've identified together with you. So this is a main tool that I want you guys to use. And now that we've discussed that, let's talk about, just for a few minutes, about what a winning study plan looks like. So this is our very quick kind of overview of how we recommend a study plan should look like. So it should be about 6 to 8 weeks long, okay, a month and a half to 2 months, and it should consist of 120 hours in total. Unless you're a non-native English speaker, in which case I recommend adding another 30 hours. So 150 hours in total, which if you do the math is not that much time over 6 to 8 weeks. What's the breakdown of how you should spend your time here? So it's going to take you about 20 hours on examPAL to go through all of the introductions and memorize the basics. It's going to take you another 20 hours of going over our lesson videos where we talk about answer strategies and tools. And it's going to take you another 30 hours to practice and solve questions in each. And then that's basically going through the course. And then you should take another 30 hours to solve tests, to solve GMAT CATs and official guides. Excuse me, and another 20 hours to work on your verbal tools. That is using memorizing a vocabulary and just working on your basic grammar, which we recommend just taking time and reading. Just taking time in the morning or afternoon or evening and reading magazines or something like that. And if you're not native English speaker, so make that 50 hours instead of 30. If you're doing it on examPAL, it's pretty simple. You just follow the trail that the course is built according to for the first 50 days. And you give yourself about 2 days per topic. For each topic, the first day you learn the material, that is, you go over the lesson and intro videos. And the second day, you go through our practice system. And in addition, give yourself about an hour to an hour and a half per day of reading, and take a day off per week. And then in your final 10 days, you want to be taking exams every other day and reviewing your exam and analyzing them, going over your mistakes, and then the next day reviewing material the exams have revealed to be material you should go over. While you're doing this, keep an error log of all your mistakes. Write down kind of prominent mistakes types, mistakes that repeat themselves. As we just discussed, it's important to learn for them. And if you get stuck on something, then just keep moving. It's important to stick to your schedule and learn as much as you can. And at the very end, take a day off before the test. And finally, crush the test. So that's really what I have to tell you guys today. I want to thank you guys for being here with me. And we, as a reward for making it through, we have an Easter sale now available in which you can save up to 35% on your GMAT prep. So go ahead to take us up on that offer. Go to examPAL.com and there you will find it. And that's really it, guys. I want to say thanks for being a great audience and answering all my polls and questions. And I'm going to stop talking in just a second now, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I'm not signing off just yet. I'm going to stick here for a few more minutes. So feel free to ask. And once again, you will get an email with this video, with a recording of this video, which you'll be able to use. And take us up on our offer at examPAL.com for now with 35% off. GMAT prep. It's only for today. It's only for today, for Easter, for the next 12 hours. So don't waste any time. So thank you guys very much. And I hope to see you soon.